Lewisa Wall.
Kia ora te manga o te whare. It's my pleasure to speak on this third reading of the Human Rights Amendment Bill, and I'm really pleased that Labor is now in a position to support this piece of legislation. I just want to highlight the primary purpose of this Human Rights Amendment Bill, which is actually to establish the role of a Disability Rights Commissioner and to ensure that we uphold our obligations under the UN Conventions on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. I'd like to acknowledge that the then Disability Issues Minister, the Honourable Ruth Dyson, signed the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities on behalf of the New Zealand government. That was in 2006. As a result of us signing that convention, the Honourable Tariana Turia then appointed a Disability Commissioner within the Human Rights Act, and in fact it was then Catherine Delahunter who proposed a members' bill to ensure that that role was a formal role within the Human Rights Commission, and that's why this piece of legislation is before us today. What is interesting to note is during the passage of the review, we somehow then lost our Race Relations Commissioner and the EEO Commissioner. And as part of the process of review through this House, it's heartening to see that in response for the overwhelming call to retain those two particular positions, we are in a position now to support this piece of legislation. I too want to acknowledge my colleague Jacinda Ardern, who's our lead in the justice area. And I want to highlight that she wrote to the Minister, Amy Adams, on the 2nd of June, and this is what she asked. She wanted some assurance that the changes proposed will not lead to a reduction in the number of commissioners currently operating or the loss of their current portfolios. And the two areas that she highlighted, in addition to race relations, EEO, disability, were Indigenous and LGBTI commissioners. Currently, the Commission has designated LGBTI Indigenous commissioners, Mr. Speaker. So I want to quote from Amy Adams' response, dated the 9th of June, and I quote, "Over the last 10 years, the Commission has operated with around 4.5 full-time equivalent commissioners. The intent of the changes in the bill is to remove the current prescription about what commissioners can be full-time or part-time, and in delegating extra portfolios to best meet the needs of the Commission. The mix of commissioners will be a matter for the Chief Commissioner to determine. However, and this is the point I want to highlight, we do not anticipate there being any significant changes to the number of commissioners as a result of this legislation." And it was on that advice from the Minister, Mr. Speaker, that Labor is supporting this piece of legislation. So it's very important that I've read the Minister's response to a letter from my colleague Jacinda Ardern, because that in fact is how this piece of legislation now needs to be interpreted by the Chief Human Rights Commissioner, and then delegating those particular Indigenous and LGBT rights commissioners. So the history of this piece of legislation is aligned to us as a country signing up to the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And actually, if you look at all of the named commissioners, they all relate to different conventions that over time New Zealand has signed up to. The Chief Commissioner, for example, his role really is about New Zealand signing up to the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights in 1966. The Race Relations Commissioner is directly aligned to the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination in 1965. What I really want to highlight is that of the commissioners, the LGBTIQ Commissioner probably is the one that doesn't have a convention. But the UN has actually produced two reports, and the last was out in June 2005. And there is a commitment by the United Nations to continue to highlight those people across the world who are most marginalised, who are most discriminated against. And really that's what our commitment to the United Nations Conventions and human rights are all about. We cannot stand by and watch particular members of our family, our human family, our communities discriminated against. So it is a pleasure for me to be speaking in support of this legislation. Kia ora.